Good morning. This is the November 15th Assembly Enterprise Utility Oversight Committee. We're set to discuss again further the details of the transaction at MLP Chugach Electric. And I would like to start with introductions, so let's just start here.
Sure. Becky Winters, the Municipal Attorney.
Alex Lipka, Chief Fiscal Officer.
Christopher Constant, Assembly.
Austin Davidson, Assembly.
Forrest Dunbar.
Pete Peterson.
CC Hamilton.
Can we kind of make our way through?
Lee Fever, Chugach Electric. Jason Balkenstedt, Mayor's Office.
Matt Clarkson, Chugach Electric.
Martha Miller, Chugach Electric.
Julie Myers, Chugach Electric. Julie Haskett, Chugach Electric.
Eugene Haberman, Observer.
All right, in the back.
Tony Izzo with Matanuska Electric.
Julie Esty, Matanuska Electric. Marilyn Alvarenga with Northern Compass Group.
Joe Howell, University of Asking.
Where? Can I hear you both again? It's hard to hear.
Joe Howell, University of Asking.
Thank you.
Bill Hoppe, ADC.
Stuart Parks, Chugach Board.
Harold Hollis, Chugach Board.
All right, thank you. If you'll turn to the agenda, you'll note that we have two items listed. One is a briefing and update on the letter of support from the Anchorage Economic Development Council and our corporation, and that's Mr. Bill Pop, and then our kind of part two or part three of our briefing on the transaction details. So we'll start with you, Mr. Pop.
Chris, I'm online.
Thank you, Dick. Sorry.
Mr. Chair, where would you like me?
Just come on up. You can talk right there. It's fine.
Okay.
However.
Thank you, sir. Today we, I'm sorry. On the last day of October, the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation Board met and considered a presentation from Municipal Light and Power, Municipality of Anchorage, and Chugach Electric Association with representatives in the room to look at the final terms of the proposed sale between of MLNP to Chugach Electric Association. Just brief history: Anchorage Economic Development Corporation 2 years ago, addressing significant concerns of the ratepayers, many of whom are members of our organization, especially large institutional ratepayers in a number of industry sectors, who were dealing with significant spikes in their electric bills, and in some cases were amounting to in excess of tens of thousands, and in one case over $100,000 in additional charges. These were significant impacts to these businesses, and they were seeking our help in trying to find a way to address them. AEDC pulled together a working group representative of these different businesses that represented a number of different sectors: housing, large institutional business, hospitals, etc., that came together and went through a very aggressive working group process that included presentations from MLNP and Chugach Electric Association. And at the end, as well as a nationally recognized consultant that was recommended by both organizations as someone that we could have a conversation with as an arm's length industry expert. At the end of the process, we came to the conclusion that while there are many great things that the two utilities are doing together, and that they should be applauded for that, and that there are some additional smaller steps that could be taken towards efficiencies, the one last big efficiency that had not been addressed was the potential merger of the two utilities. AEDC's working group then put forward a 2-page letter to the Assembly, to the Mayor's office, to the utilities, recommending strongly that they go back and look at a conversation that has taken place multiple times over the previous decades in attempts to try and bring utility infrastructure into a more rational structure, because in communities of our size across the United States, one utility is usually the service provider, and in our case we have 3. And that this seemed to be a rational approach towards at least stemming the rise in electric rates, and if anything, bringing on future efficiencies that might even bring them down. That was what initiated this whole process, and you are now currently addressing the end stage. During the municipal election, AEDC took a position supporting a yes vote on the ballot proposition, not because we were satisfied that we knew all the terms of the deal. It was not rational at that point in time, because the whole purpose of the vote was to give the municipality the permission to enter into those negotiations. We supported it with a caveat that we would want to address further the terms of the deal before we would support the final proposed deal. Those final terms were provided to us in written form in advance of the meeting on October the 31st. They were distributed to the board members, giving them an opportunity to review the materials. There was a presentation from the municipality with Chugach Electric Association present to answer questions. The board of directors had a number of questions, particularly focusing on the PILT structure. They were very focused on that particular piece. And in the end, following the responses that they received from the municipality, the board members present voted unanimously to support the purchase terms and to support the ultimate sale of MLMP. Clearly keeping in mind the ultimate goal, which is to unify two utilities into one to provide better service and through better efficiencies to the ratepayers of both MLMP and Chugach Electric Association. We looked at the terms of the deal as they were presented. You have, I believe, a copy of our letter. That letter does, I hope you have a copy of our letter.
We do.
Okay. And you can see the point that we made with the 5 particular bullet points that the board called out as reasons to vote yes. But ultimately, that is the position of the board of directors of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation to support the transaction.
All right. Any questions? Nope. Hearing none, though, I'm glad to hear that it was unanimous. Letter didn't say that, and so I definitely wondered what the vote was. And unanimous is a good vote. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. All right. Into the substance of the briefing. Wait, before we go there, Mr. Weddleton has arrived, Mr. Falsey has arrived, and also bond counsel. I forget your name.
Dean Thompson.
Dean Thompson arrives.
He's our regulatory counsel.
Regulatory counsel. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I don't know if we want to turn the lights down so you can see. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, to remind you of kind of where we are in the process of reviewing the transaction, last time we met, we talked about the asset purchase and sale agreement and the summary of economic effects. There's a question of where will the money go. Today, our plan is to talk about the PILT agreement, the power purchase agreement, and the BRU fuel agreement, which are the other ancillary documents for the transaction that are in near final form at this point. And then also to talk about the Regulatory Commission of Alaska process. That's why Dean is here with me today. He's our expert in this area, will be representing us as we go through the RCA process with Chugach and can answer questions about that and talk you through that process. Our final work session will be on November 30th, where we'll have our outside financial advisors, Concentric Energy Advisors, here to talk about the financial aspects of the transaction and answer any questions you may have on that front. In terms of the documents in front of you today, I brought copies for all the members of the body and also members of the public of these 3 agreements, the PILT agreement, the power purchase agreement, and the BRU fuel agreement. The BRU fuel agreement and the power purchase agreement are the same copies that were available at the last work session. There has been one minor tweak to the PILT agreement, which is why the members of the body received 3 hole punch copies. You can put them in your binder, and I will point out what that change is when we get there in the review for all members of the public present. Again, three documents we're going to go through today: the PILT agreement, payment in lieu of taxes agreement, the power purchase agreement, and the BRU fuel agreement. I'm going to turn to the PILT agreement first, and the key terms I'd like to talk about with that agreement are the formula for calculation of payments. When we talked about this in big picture overview, I pointed out that we have agreed to a different formula for calculation of PILT than is currently used to calculate MUSA in order to capture or to remove the incentive to only build infrastructure outside of the MLMP legacy territory. I'm going to talk through that in greater depth. There's a point in the PILT agreement about collection shifting from just the MLMP legacy territory to all Chugach customers in 2034. Talk about that, how that dovetails with the BRU fuel agreement. And then also there's a provision that specifically provides that there won't be any duplicate taxes. This, for the municipality, is essentially a pure payment in lieu of tax. It will be if we somehow in the future enact a tax on these same assets, we won't get to capture both. We're getting one or the other. But right now there's no taxes paid by electric cooperatives in the state, so this creates a revenue stream for the municipality that comes in under the cap and replaces what would otherwise be MUSA revenue. In terms of the PILT calculation formula, so there's 3 different provisions.
Hold on, Becky.
Yeah.
Mr. Croft just arrived, so go ahead.
Certainly. 3 different provisions that need to be read together to explain the payment in lieu of tax calculation formula, and I have a simplified version on the next slide, so if this all sounds like too much here, hopefully it will be more clear in the next slide. The way we currently calculate MUSA, we look at the value of assets within the service territory, we multiply by the mill rate for the applicable district that the asset is located in. We're doing something a little bit more complicated here in that we're multiplying the millage rate by the adjusted net book value for the current year. That's where we capture this concept of not just being a straight assessment of the assets within the service territory, but using a formula in order to tie that to the growth of Chugach's assets as a whole. So what does adjusted net book value mean? It means the product of the net book value of the MLMP plant in service as of the date of closing and the overall plant in service change. And overall plant in service change has this long explanation here that's a fraction, where the numerator is the net book value of all Chugach plant in service as of the year in which we're imposing the PILT, and the denominator is the sum of the assets that both MLMP and Chugach held as of the date of closing. So what does that really boil down to? What that boils down to is we're multiplying the value of the MLMP assets at closing times the increase in value of all Chugach assets within the municipality in any given year. So each year it'll be a number that's greater than 1, hopefully, as long as the Chugach assets continue to increase in the municipality. We'll be multiplying that by the value at closing, and then we'll multiply all of that by the applicable mill rate to yield this formula-based calculation for PILT. And as we talked about in basic terms last time, I think 2 work sessions ago, what we're trying to prevent is something like this. We've got our former, our MLMP legacy service territory, and say that we're looking at, Chugach is looking at building a new substation down here, right on Tudor. They build it on this side of the road under the old MUSA calculation. They'd pay MUSA on that, but if they built it over here on this side of the road, they wouldn't. So we're trying to avoid that kind of disincentive. We're also trying to avoid the situation where we've got plant 2A over here. Say sometime in the next 50 years, Chugach decommissions that large-scale asset, builds a new plant over here. It's probably not a great place for a plant, but I'm just sticking it somewhere on the map. Then we end up, again, not receiving any PILT payment on that moved plant. With the current calculation, what happens is that both of these new pieces of infrastructure, if they were in these locations, would be added to that overall plant and service change. And so we'd see that increase reflected in how the PILT is calculated, again, regardless of whether those assets are constructed within the pink area or within the yellow area. Other key terms, as we discussed, the PILT will be calculated from the ratepayers within the legacy territory through the end of 2033. That aligns with the BRU fuel agreement. During that period, those ratepayers will also exclusively see the benefit of the BRU gas. After that, in 2034, both restrictions are lifted. The benefit of that gas flows to all Chugach ratepayers, and then the burden of paying the PILT also is then spread across ratepayers. And this is the change. So when I said that there was one tiny change to the PILT agreement, I'll back up here for a minute. It's this sentence here. We slightly rephrased that when we looked at it one more time collectively as a group this week. We felt like it wasn't clear enough that this was a mandate as opposed to an option after 2034 for Chugach, and so we all agreed collectively to tweak it ever so slightly. So now what it says is very clear. Beginning on January 1st, 2034, Chugach shall collect such amounts from retail customers of Chugach within the municipality without restriction. Section 2.08 deals with, again, this no duplicate taxation. Makes clear that if the municipality imposes a real or personal property tax specifically on the property that is the subject of the PILT, then that amount is offset against the PILT amount so that there's not double taxation on the same assets that is then passed on to ratepayers to deal with. Yeah.
On that one, so can you explain again a little bit why we're doing that at the top? Why that particular year, and why not have everyone pay it immediately? Why hold off
until 2033? That's part of our regulatory approval for the BRU, right? Isn't that the issue that we have to?
Well, it does coincide with when the exclusive benefits of MLMP's BRU interest would end. And it's sort of the date that currently is expected for the field to stop producing. We think it'll probably go longer than that. But we wanted to keep in order to keep the ratepayers indifferent initially, we wanted the MLMP ratepayers to continue paying the costs that they are paying now, which means the MUSA. And then similarly, we wanted the MLMP ratepayers to continue to receive the benefit of the BRU interest.
All right, thank you.
Okay. And that's all I wanted to go over with respect to the PILTS agreement. Unless there are questions on that document, I will turn to the power purchase agreement next, which is somewhat more complex. Yes.
Yeah, now would be the time for that question.
So we received this good catch by Chris. The RCA questions, there's this article in Petroleum News, which you all had a chance to read. And it sounds like the RCA had some rather pointed questions on the pills and the legality of the pills. Is that the case, and are you concerned at all about these questions?
For that, I'll defer to Dean again, who is our advocate at the RCA.
Yes, the commission did ask a lot of questions about the PILT payment component of this because they just don't see a contract term like this very often. The questions about the legality of it had to do with the fact that by state statute, Chugach is exempt from ad valorem taxes. Our main point is, so I think the question was, because they're exempt and this agreement provides for Chugach to pay payment in lieu of taxes, is that inconsistent with the statute? And we believe that it is not inconsistent with it. Chugach cannot be compelled to pay ad valorem taxes, but this is a negotiated agreement term, and so we don't think there is a conflict.
And I would say it looks the same as any other. I mean, the municipality has a limited number of PILT agreements. We have one, I believe, with the Department of Defense concerning housing related to the base, and we have another one with Cook Inlet Housing, and then we have a sort of, I guess we don't have an actual formal written agreement with the Unitarian Universalist Congregation. They just offer PILT every year. So each of our PILT agreements is a somewhat one-off situation, and it is in each instance with an entity that is formally exempt from taxation under state and federal law.
So can I ask a follow-up? So how is that state statute structured? I mean, does it say something like, is there any concern there that we will be, this bill violates that statute? I know they're not being compelled, but is the statute structured in such a way where it's like, you shall not have these kind of payments from these kind of customers?
No, it isn't structured that way. But we believe that it's in the Cooperative Act, Alaska Statute 10.25, and it provides for electric and telephone cooperatives to be exempt from ad valorem taxes. But the wording isn't such that a voluntary agreement to pay a PILT would violate it, in our opinion.
Can I ask one final question? If God forbid, the RCA comes back and says, no, you cannot do this, do we have any kind of contingency plan, or does that kill the deal?
I think then we have to figure out whether or not we would go back to kind of negotiating what we would have as an alternative solution. It would also depend. It would depend on what their decision said. If they said absolutely not, you can roll some of this value into an acquisition adjustment or some other way to recoup this, then we'd talk about whether or not that was financially feasible as between the parties. If they said no, this amount of payment is impermissible, we're not letting this happen, I think then we'd consider whether or not how critical the PILT was to going through the deal. So it would certainly be a significant issue that we'd need to all consider if the RCA issued an absolutely not on this portion of the deal.
Please, Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Becky, is the requirement for by December 31st just that we enter into these agreements, and then if some hiccup comes with the RCA, we could renegotiate them, but we won't have any trouble in terms of the public vote?
Yeah, the requirement from the ballot initiative is simply that the Assembly approve the transaction via ordinance. It isn't even explicitly tied to execution of the documents. We would plan to execute them by December 31st, but it's simply that the Assembly must approve the deal.
And we have previously discussed that at that point it's out of our hands. It's really a negotiating tool for the administration between the parties. And so we're giving our blessing on that now. and it's
I
free.
understand.
No.
So, I have a question now. Any other questions? Oh, okay, go ahead. Ms.
Thank
Perez.
you, Mr. Chair. A question on the color-coded map. Did I understand correctly that in terms of the service areas, existing service areas for Chugach and NLP, if, for example, the assets that are in the existing NLP service area would end up to be only in the Chugach service area, that would impact the Pilt payment?
The idea is that we've created this formula situation that removes that issue, because if we go back to that slide, I can zip back here. So under the way MUSA is calculated, it's based only on what's physically in the service territory. So the pink is the MLP service territory. So say we've got this substation down here in the university area, we've got Plant 2A. Under that formula, if we just stuck with it, Chugach would pay PILT on those assets, but they wouldn't pay PILT on any of the assets in the yellow in the Chugach Legacy Service Territory. The reason that we concocted this formula was, again, to address the issue where that creates sort of a disincentive for investment in this legacy territory, where, again, if there's this question of are we building a new substation here or just right across the street, the logical decision is across the street, because then you're not paying PILT on it. And again, if you're decommissioning a major asset, you have some incentive to move it somewhere where you wouldn't pay PILT on it. And so with this formula, we believe that that captures or eliminates that issue, because there is this increase in overall plant and service change that is factored in. So when, say, a new plant is built or a new substation, that's factored into the PILT we receive, regardless of whether it's in the yellow or in the pink. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Goss, can I ask a question on that? Something just occurred to me. So the formula says value of MLP assets, and then times the increase in all assets within the municipality. Well, why isn't, why, if Chugach wanted to decommission that and then move it just outside the municipality, would that allow them to avoid the PILT payment? And what if they built it in the valley, or they switched to, more water power off Bradley Lake or something like that?
That is possible, but we don't have any jurisdiction outside the municipality, so there's kind of nothing we can do about that. They could do that now. They could elect to build assets outside of the municipality. I mean,
but if the goal is to keep the PILT payment pretty stable, and to keep it basically, we have a number, and this is basically the number we're shooting for. I don't know. I feel like I have a strange sensation that right now we're speaking into a record that's being played at a civil trial at some point, arguing about, like we did with the North Anchorage land agreement. Does this gas, is it our trash, or is it your land? You know what I'm saying?
yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, I think that there we run into an impasse. We really just don't have jurisdiction to impose a tax or a tax like, or what we're doing here is we're replacing an existing tax payment for, we really don't have jurisdiction over assets that are outside of the boundary of the municipality. So asking for payment of something that looks like tax on something that's outside of the municipality just certainly, again, to the, PILT agreements are certainly somewhat free form, but they are generally governed by the idea that it's to replace what would otherwise be paid on real property that's located within the municipality in the form of tax.
You can't legally just say, here's the number and adjust with inflation.
Well, I mean, then it would be something else. It wouldn't be a PILT agreement. We'd be saying, I think then we'd be basically saying, this isn't a PILT agreement, we're just asking for money over time. And that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to replace a revenue stream under the cap, and that looks like a payment in lieu of tax.
I think that raises the question of what's the useful life of Plant 2 or the kind of current capacity, because 30 to 50 years from now, we're pretty good for a long time, and we may need a new power plant. We'll hear about that later, I'm sure. Becky, I have a question for you. If there are no other questions. Oh, Ms. Welton.
Maybe comment on that. Maybe it doesn't quite relate to this financial thing, but Chugach Electric would be doing us a favor to put all that electrical junk on the city, because it's ugly as we to the side of the land. I mean, these substations have to go where they go, but they're always in the middle of the neighborhood, right on the street, like junk.
Well, I think to a certain degree, but we're talking about $300 million asset. I'm willing to take a little bit of an eyesore in the edge of my district for a $300 million asset.
But in the end, again, I think we also, if you look at it in the grand scheme of sort of what taxes are intended to do, right? If they decommission a plant, sell the property to another private landowner, we will receive taxes on the land and whatever they build there. So we're trying to replace our tax revenue here with through this structure, and we would have tax revenue unless they sell it to, I don't know, a church. But presuming that the land which is sold to another industrial user, then we would receive taxes on that. So in theory, the net impact for the municipality would be a draw. We wouldn't get the revenue here; we'd get the revenue from another source, which is what we're trying to do: is maintain our broad base, our tax base across the board here.
And there's just no way they're going to build a $300 million power plant to avoid paying $4 million a year over time. It's just not reality. So,
If they were gonna build one place or the other.
right, that would be when they need it, which is a different story under the current climate. You had a question, Ms. Rolton? That was it? Okay, then my turn, Ms. Pearson. Currently, our tax records show an exempt property as 0, right? And so how do we calculate the present value of a tax exempt property?
My understanding is that here we will look at the value. We have a value of assets that comes out of the calculation that we bring to the RCA of the plant owned by MLMP, and that's the basis here. So you look at the formula.
But 20 years from now, when you're
the increase in the value of all their assets. My understanding is Chugach has the same calculation because of the fact that they're also a rate-regulated utility, but I would defer to the more economically minded brains in the room for confirmation of that. I don't know, Arthur, if you can take that one.
Yes, we do calculate net plant on an ongoing basis, and what we will have to do is calculate how much of that net plant is within the municipality of Naples, because some of our assets are outside of the municipality. So that's another aspect of this that we will be doing, and this information we will provide on an annual basis to the municipality as well as to the budgetary commission assets.
okay. Thank you.
And that's how we do it right now too. Like if you look at the code calculation from USA, it's reliant on that same source. It's not like our appraisal department goes out and looks at everything and is like, pretty good substation.
It's falling apart.
All right, where was I? Sorry, we'll zip through here.
Thank you.
No problem. If there's no more PILT questions, we'll move on to the power purchase agreement. The key terms I want to talk about here are the MEA offer and how that will impact what is covered by the power purchase agreement, post-closing decision-making and environmental risk, and some key terms, payment for all capacity, the assignment of the renewable attributes related to the project, dealing with capital operating and maintenance costs during the term, the set-off and cross-default terms of the agreement, the purchase option, and the security interest that's granted by the document. I've skipped some other more boilerplate terms here. If you have questions about anything else in the agreement, definitely feel free to interrupt me. In terms of the MEA offer, the agreement is structured, acknowledges the fact that the municipality has been discussing with MEA whether MEA would be interested in either entering into a power purchase agreement for their pro rata share or purchasing their pro rata share of the equipment asset. And depending on their response and what resolution we reach with MEA, then the amount of the municipality share and the amount of the overall Clutina project interest that is transferred to Chugach will vary. Chugach will either be, at the end of the day, the owner of 83.33% of the Clutina interest, or the owner of 64.29, or not the owner, but the beneficial user of 83.33% of the Clutina interest, or 64.29% of the Clutina interest. Again, depending on what MEA decides. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to have Mr. Izzo to speak to this at this point.
Time?
Sure, this is when we're going to talk about it. I know that my understanding is we're working on a response right now to MEA and Mr. Izzo based on some questions they raised for us. Mr. Falsey is, I think, our lead on that, so he can speak to that as well. I know we are working on getting that out this week.
All right, thank you. So before the meeting, Tony Izzo, the manager of MEA, requested some time to speak, and so I think this is a good time. If you don't mind, Mr. Izzo. Thank
Good
you.
afternoon.
Wherever you want to be. It's fine. See you.
This is okay. I can see everybody.
Yeah.
Name is Tony Izzo. I'm the CEO of East Electric. Back in June 9th, the Assembly unanimously approved AR 2018-21, and talks about the Assembly expecting CEA to work together with MEA to ensure that there's some value of the sale to municipality residents that reside in the part of the municipality that is served by Matthews Electric. And it goes on, section 2 says the Anchorage Assembly expects CEA to act in good faith and continue current progress that's been made, et cetera. And I can report to you today that Chugach has certainly, the staff here has acted in good faith. We've had ongoing discussions. We've got some pending board approvals, but I feel good about that. You know, Matthews Electric has never wanted to intervene or slow this down. And I need to give you a little bit of history. We realized that the voter initiative, as it was being contemplated, including sale of assets that we had rights to. And so on February 27th, I wrote a letter to the mayor that indicated that formal notification, MEA intends to assert its rights under the Occlupment Agreement, including right to consent to the assignment or transfer of another party's interest in the project, etc. I was really pleased because I got a call so quickly in response from the mayor that I had to look at my computer to calculate the 22 minutes from the time the letter was transmitted electronically to the time he called me on my cell phone. That's about where the good feeling stopped, though. It took until May 11th to get a meeting with the 8th floor. The second meeting was August 30th, where the outline of what's presented here was first shared with us. We heard some things there in terms of options for the first time. We had another meeting September 27th. We heard slightly different, kind of a take it or leave it, here are the options. And it comes to mind in terms of good faith that I wanted to express that we're frustrated. We don't want to slow this down. We want to see this go through, but it has been extremely frustrating. We have kept it quiet because we believe that this will get resolved. But as I understand it, we're coming down to the wire here in terms of approvals. Again, I feel real good about Chugach and what's happening there, but Matthews Electric and my board is pretty frustrated. There's a real lack of engagement, and we're not sure why that is.
Mr. Wellington.
Could you spell out very carefully for me exactly what are the problems?
The issue is, there's an agreement from the 90s that indicates and spells out the ownership of the Occlupment Hydro project. As indicated here, MEA has 16.67%. Simply put, each of the three owners has first option should any of the other owners sell, pro rata share. And as you see there, if MEA exercises or has the option to purchase our pro rata share or acquire it from MLMP because it's selling it would take Chugach to 64.29%. It takes MEA from 16.67 to about 35, plus. We know there's been a tremendous amount of discussion, ongoing meetings with Chugach regarding negotiation of the transfer. We just don't understand why we haven't been given the opportunity to have the same amount of time to enter into meaningful negotiations. Now, it's not something I have to have resolved by December 4th or December 31. But there were times recently in all of this where we thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have to assert legal rights as this thing is going to the Assembly to approve, and it's going to look like we held back and are trying to intervene and sour a deal, when really I want you to know that we've tried very hard and in earnest to try to get some meaningful discussions.
So is the issue then how much you would pay for that percent?
Yes, it is.
There's no dollar amount.
We've offered to, and I'll let Mr. Falsey speak to this more specifically. I don't know if he can see me from around the corner. But we have as we've set up to all of you, we've extended the same offer to MEA that we extended to Chugach in terms of the what the purchase price would be for this percentage of the interest at this time, or what the power purchase agreement payment would be. So it's, we're extending the same terms, again, on a proportional basis, yeah.
I would disagree that it's on the same terms. I don't want to reveal, information that's covered by confidentiality agreements, but we've written down what those concerns are in October 27th letter. We have not heard a response yet on that letter, but they are defined in a 4-page letter.
And that is what we plan to respond to this week, so that's what we're working on. There were some questions raised about calculation that we honestly have asked for some assistance in trying to get resolved, and we'll have that back this week.
Can I follow up?
Please, Mr. Wellington.
So, you told True Gas Electric to buy our share for X or agree to buy an hour for this, and True Gas Electric chose to buy an hour. Is that where we ended up?
Well, that's a little bit more complicated. We went, as we relayed, we started this deal with we're going to sell everything, and then for a variety of reasons, it made more sense for us to enter into a long-term power purchase agreement here. And the long-term power purchase agreement is not a sale. We're not selling the asset until the end of the sale, and so the rights under the Eklutna agreement are triggered by a sale, which will be triggered at the end. We'll get to eventually. There's a purchase option in the agreement. So when that option is exercised, certainly the rights under the Eklutna agreement will be triggered for MEA to purchase its proportionate share. But we, at this point, have offered that even though we're not selling, we will offer, because we originally had contemplated selling, and that's what we were talking about. We thought that a good faith offer would be to say we're not selling, but we're still willing to offer you what we offered to what we're giving to Chugach, and maybe you want to buy, maybe you prefer to do that, or maybe you prefer to do a power purchase agreement like Chugach is doing, because we're able to offer this relatively low cost power.
But he's not happy.
But we're working on it. This is the project. My position would be this is where negotiations. We honestly spent a long time negotiating a very complex deal with Chugach, and that occupied the vast majority of our time. And we've been now working on trying to figure out this piece with Matnuska Electric, and we will continue that dialogue from here forward to try and figure out a solution.
I don't disagree, through the chair, I don't disagree that that's the goal. That's certainly our goal. What I would not like to see is a situation where there's an assembly vote or an action that takes place that puts us in a position where now we're trying to assert our rights and increasing the risk of the deal before the regulatory commission. We want to go in and approve it and say we stand with Chugach, the MOA, and Municipal Light Power, that this is a good thing. That's really what we have wanted from the beginning and what we intend to do. But,
all right, Mr. Dunbar.
I have 2 questions that are sort of related. Is it your intention now to make this purchase and increase your share to 35.7%?
if we have an opportunity to negotiate the terms instead of a take it or leave it.
Okay. So because this is so focused on inclusion, because you brought up the agreement from the early 90s, and I'm happy here, which is a rare opportunity, I'd like to talk about something we always talk about. We passed a resolution regarding MLP specifically when we own the asset. They would honor the 1991 Fish and Wildlife Agreement and work to restore the Eklutna watershed. We got a similar pledge, although not in writing, from Mr. Thieber. And Mr. Thieber and Chugach actually put money in their budget to study the water flow and take concrete steps towards restoring the Eklutna watershed. And so I want to ask you whether you own 19% or 35%, or is MEA also committed to honoring the 1991 Fish and Wildlife Agreement and restoring the Eklutna watershed?
Through the chair, Assemblyman Dunbar, the answer is simple, absolutely yes. MEA has committed to do so. We've attended some of the same meetings, and the Matnuska Electric Board voted unanimously, similar to what the Chugach Board has done. So our positions are the same.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Ms. LaPresse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Ms. McPherson about timeline. Since we need to approve the deal by December 31st, is that adequate time to respond to the letter of October 27th and then have subsequent discussion and negotiation to address MEA's?
Well, that's why that's why the agreement is drafted this way. The agreement is drafted with this provision that says if we reach agreement with MEA, then this happens. If they say they're not interested right now, then something else happens. So that's why it kind of has this choose your own adventure term in it, such that because we wanted to bring a document to you that you could review and approve, knowing what would happen, but also provide for the fact that we had not yet and it would likely not reach a final agreement before the date of the public hearing in which you're asked to approve this. So that's why we've got section 2.1 in there and the remainder of article 2 that addresses what happens depending on the choice that's offered to MEA and what they decide to do.
Mr. Falsey, would you like to chime in or take a pass?
Well, as usual, Becky has covered it better than I would have, so I'm happy to just say and underline everything Becky said. Madam Lecture is right. The ball's in our court to respond to their letter. That's taken a little bit more time than we thought it would because they asked some good questions. We have to do some more homework. But as Becky said, hoping that we can get that out and respond to it this week. You know, and to be very clear, one of the challenges here is we believe that we have come to an agreement where this works with Chigash, and we get a certain amount of money. And we carved out a way for this to also go to some portion to MEA too, but we less interested in an arrangement where the amount of money that we would have received from Chigash is now less than we received from MEA. So there is an aspect that you can characterize as a kind of take it or leave it approach, but it's not so much take it or leave it, it's that we have one deal in hand, and if someone else wants to buy in that same regime, we're willing to talk about that, but if we're looking for a 50% discount or some other kind of discount, the deal we have is probably the one that's more attractive for us. So we're certainly willing to find some solution that works for everybody, and we are trying to be responsive. We'll hopefully get that letter out soon.
So it's not our place to negotiate, but my experience in real estate is there's often a call for your last best offer before the deal is made into a contract, and so it sounds like we're getting close to that point. Thank you. I want to continue. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, final question.
I just want to make clear, so we don't have to sell our share to anyone, and the power we make from our share, we have to to buy it all. Is that correct?
That's right. And so there was a way of doing this where we could have left MEA completely out of the conversation. We didn't want to do that. What we tried to do was to say, at the very least, at the end of all of this, we will agree with everyone that we will sell our share for net book value, which is the cheapest amount we could reasonably sell it for. And that should be unobjectionable to everyone, and MEA can get in then, you guys can own it then. That's great, but you have to wait a long time for that to write them. In the meantime, we said MEA could buy its share now at the price that you guys pay, or could do our purchase agreement at the price that you guys pay. Hopefully we can come to some kind of arrangement that works for everybody, but I don't know, and I'm just trying to be candid here, I don't know that we're interested in reopening it as though we had a brand new kind of sale, because Chigash has already put an offer on the table that we like. So we kind of know what price we're looking for.
So, and this is the heart of the negotiation, and I don't know, I don't believe we'll settle that here for you because that's your guys' jobs. And we have a lot more to cover. Mr. Zill, last comment that was Mr. Falsey. Thank you for those comments. Mr. Zill.
I don't think any of us in our personal lives would appreciate a situation where you were given an offer and you were told, look, we already went to the voters and said it was going to be this much, and Chigash is going to pay this, and so you got to pay the difference to make it up to us. We want the same opportunity that Chigash had, and that is to negotiate. We appreciate the three options. It would have been nice to have had them prior to a month or so ago. And there are, we have some legal rights. You know, if all of this was intended to provide some value to Matnuska members, I said Chigash, I believe, has acted in good faith, and I greatly appreciate that. I don't feel it's the same way on the other side. So anyway, thanks for the time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hizzo. Seems like you get to work it up for you.
We'll continue to negotiate. You know what we do. Okay, continuing on, and I'll try to be brief since we've got 16 minutes. Could somebody over by the door maybe grab the lights? Thank you, Mr. Falsey. This is a quick summary of, we've talked about this issue of what happens with with management of the facility after the execution of this power purchase agreement. Clearly, the municipality continues to own a share. We'll continue to have a representative on the operating committee. We've committed to pick that representative in consultation with Chigash, and that our representative will make their decisions consistent with prudent utility practice, which we'd hope they would anyway, and with the rights and obligations of the parties under the PPA. So essentially, we're taking Chugach into account in our representative's decision-making on this body. Our representative will also be our representative for any decisions with respect to the Fish and Wildlife Agreement, and again, taking into account Chugach's rights and concerns. And in terms of the obligations of that agreement, as we've said before, that transfers wholesale. Chugach has agreed to take on the obligations of that agreement that would otherwise apply to the municipal share, and to continue with the progress set forth by that agreement in terms of studying what needs to be done there and bearing the cost of whatever is required pursuant to that agreement. Payment terms. The way the agreement is structured, Chugach pays for all power attributable to the Chugach portion, they assume the risk of non-production. So if there's something that happens to the project, which means that power is not being produced, the municipality is still paid, they've assumed that risk as part of the agreement. Chugach is also paying capital maintenance and operating costs. These are slightly unusual terms for a power purchase agreement, but necessary in this instance because the municipality is not keeping a functioning utility infrastructure. We won't have people and a department that will be able to deal with this kind of infrastructure after the power purchase agreement is executed, and so it makes sense in this instance for Chugach to bear these expenses and these responsibilities going forward. The MOA has also agreed to assign all renewable energy certificates or credits and similar rights to Chugach under the agreement. A few other key terms. Section 8.2 provides a set-off. We talked about that a bit in the last work session, where there are obligations that the municipality owes to Chugach under one of the other deal agreements that we are not fulfilling. They're able to set that off against the amount they would pay under this agreement. Likewise, there's a cross-default section under Section 9.1G, which says that a default under the other agreements is also a default under this agreement. And these two terms, I think, are helpful for both parties in terms of governing our relationship going forward, because this transaction won't be done right at closing. There are a lot of obligations and commitments we've made to each other for the next 3 to 5 decades, and so this helps to assure that both parties have some ability to exercise some control if the other party is in default under any other piece of the agreement, whether it's a post-closing commitment under the asset purchase agreement, or a failure to pay PILT, or a failure to provide to pay funding that's due under a post-closing indemnity, et cetera, is addressed here. And then, as we just discussed briefly, there's a purchase option built in at the end of the term of the agreement for Chugach to purchase their portion for net book value minus the net book value of any capital expenditures that Chugach made during the term. So if they've been paying to fix the equipment, they get to now deduct that off what they're going to pay to purchase the equipment, because they've been making those expenditures over time. And then Section 15.14 has a provision that's useful in bankruptcy. Because there are a few provisions of this agreement that look unusual for a power purchase agreement, if we had any concerns about this being recharacterized in a bankruptcy proceeding, which is always a risk, we have this Section 15.14 built in that clarifies the nature of the agreement, and also builds in an additional security interest where we effectively are given a security interest in our own asset that we're going to keep owning, which is a backstop against any kind of concerns that might come up in a bankruptcy proceeding.
Mr. Watson.
Okay, so they could purchase decades down the road for net book value, so they're going to maintain the equipment even on our stuff. It's the same equipment. So, and you say the Chugach portion, which is part that MBA would have.
Well, so there's another.
Some claim to.
Yeah, well, if you look at Title 14, there's another provision in Title 14 that explains what the Chugach portion is for the purpose of the option, and it there explains that. So even if at this point, if MEA opts right now and says nope, we don't want a power purchase agreement now, we're going to deal with this when the option is exercised, and then we will exercise our rights. The agreement in Title 14 contains some additional complicated language that says in the event the MEA doesn't exercise their option or accept their offer up front, but at the end of the day they say yes, we do want to buy our portion, then the Chugach portion is reduced accordingly There are provisions in there that explain kind of what happens exactly there. But the agreement does provide for that option to be exercised either upfront or at the end when Chugach is executing presumably their purchase option to the share.
So this could, if at the end of that period, MEA says, we're not gonna buy your share, then does this Chugach portion include theirs as well? The whole thing?
Yep.
It's defined that way.
Yes, it is.
And Mr. Welton, I think there was one point made earlier that the numbers shall not ever be below zero, but
Yes.
it's going to be pretty close to zero by the time 30 to 50 years have gone by.
It will be fairly low, but it cannot be negative. With that, I will turn to the BRU fuel agreement quickly. The key term there is really all in Article 2, which is what sets out this who gets the benefit of the gas. Through and including December 31st, 2033, the gas is used to serve retail customers of Chugach within the legacy territory. And then under Section 2.02, that obligation terminates in January 1, 2034. And as Mr. Thompson explained, that's related to the useful life of the field and lines up with the PILT's commitment so that we have the folks in the legacy territory getting that benefit. At the same time, they're bearing the burden of the PILT payment, and then it all shifts in 2034. If there are no questions with that, I will turn it over to Dean Thompson to talk a bit about the Regulatory Commission process, what we can expect there, and any questions, further questions you might have about the Regulatory Commission process.
Thank you. I covered some of this at the last workshop, but we expect to submit the agreements for approval by the RCA in the first quarter of next year, 2019. And what we will be requesting is an amendment of Chugach's Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity and ML&P's Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. But the net effect of it is we're asking the RCA to approve this transaction. And the standard that the RCA applies is twofold mainly. Number one, whether Chugach is fit, willing, and able to provide the service in this expanded area, which we don't think that there will be any difficulty showing that. And then the second one is that the transaction is in the public interest. And the RCA's history and precedent with these applications is that they generally, it's a multi-factored test, whether it's in the public interest or not, and usually they focus primarily on what are the impacts to the customers of both utilities. And they're primarily looking at the rates, but also quality of service, and to some extent it involves some projections. We can identify what the impacts will be the next day after the sale, but the RCA is going to be interested in what the long-term impacts are and whether this is good or bad for the customers. And the process is, there is an application form that we and Chugach will complete with a lot of exhibits and attachments. So it will be a complete application, and the RCA will decide whether they're going to hold a hearing on it. We expect they probably will, and in that case, they will seek petitions to intervene from interested people, and they will set a schedule for a hearing and probably a schedule for pre-filed testimony by all of the parties before the hearing commences. So this will be a similar in some respects to other RCA proceedings, but it will be a formal proceeding before the panel of commissioners and an administrative law judge with the potential for others to intervene. The Attorney General's section of Regulatory Affairs and Public Advocacy, RAPA, they will most likely elect to participate, and we will have a contested case about this. Under statute, the RCA has a statutory timeline of 6 months after a complete application has been filed to issue a final order. Under statute, the RCA can extend that unilaterally one time by up to 90 days upon a finding of good cause, but they also have to report to a legislative committee of what that cause was. That 6-month period can also be extended by consent of all the parties. So if all of the parties agree that we need to take more time, that is authorized. But generally, these types of applications are resolved by a final order within 6 months after filing. So in this case, if we submitted the application at the end of the first quarter, March 31st, for example, that would mean we would expect a final order by September 30th of 2019. The issues that were raised by the commission at their last public meeting, we expect those will be issues that will be thoroughly vetted during this application process. And what is clear is the commission wants to see what the projected impacts are going to be on both sets of customers. And they, as Chugach told the commission at the public meeting, Chugach and we plan to demonstrate that given all reasonable assumptions, that life will be better with this transaction for both MLMP customers and Chugach customers than it would be without the transaction. And so that will be the review process that we go through with the RCA.
So we're getting close to the edge of our time. Any questions, Mr. Welton?
So my guess is with the RCA, this is a whopper. It's like they give a little rain thing, now they got a huge thing. Are they, I don't know, is this like they have capacity to, what do they need to do?
They've done transfers this large before. I mean, it's high profile. It's Anchorage, 2 utilities in Anchorage, but yeah, they have done, and they do this with pipeline companies as well. And
Yep, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We expect other institutions might, intervene. Every time MLMP files a rate case, I think Providence Hospital is always wanting to get involved in that, or are we anticipating that, or anyone else intervening?
just my experience with what you just described, I would expect Providence Hospital to petition to intervene. I don't have any independent knowledge of that, but that seems to be what happens. I think that would be a safe bet. The Regulatory Affairs and Public Advocacy section, I'm pretty certain they will be involved. I haven't heard of any others. The federal executive agencies sometimes intervene in MLMP rate cases on behalf of military bases. That's a possibility as well.
Thank you. Yep, thanks. And final question from me. You mentioned the parties, all parties have to agree in the case of the filing. Who are the parties in this case?
The parties, yes, I'm glad you asked that. This will be a joint application by the municipality of Anchorage and Chugach for revisions to each of our certificates of public convenience and necessity. So we'll start out, the parties will be municipality of Anchorage and Chugach.
When we come to the idea of we can extend with the agreement of all parties, that doesn't include anyone who chooses to ask to intervene, but only the main parties of the application.
It's if they are granted intervener status, then they are a party, and all parties would have to consent for there to be an extension of that timeline.
Okay, we're going to take 1 minute for public comment.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah, Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Just really quickly, I just wanted to thank Ms. Pearson. This is incredibly complex, and I think you've done an amazing job negotiating this and also presenting it to us in a way that's easy to understand. So thank you for all your great work.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Chairman, 1 minute. We gavel out in 1 minute.
My name is Eugene Carl-Heyman. I represent myself. I live in Madison Valley, follow the public process, an appropriate decision made by the governing body more like public interest. Number one, I heard reference from the MEA representative, Madison Electric Association, to some letters. I request that you get those letters posted as soon as possible as part of the packet dealing with this deal. I know the dates made reference to the mayor, February 27th and also 10/22. Considering the urgency and the time situation that's happening right now and the discussion was placed on those letters, this should be out not just to the assembly members but also to the public. So I request that you immediately put that out there. And then last, I think I'll just end it there because I'll say my remarks later in a more appropriate time with more members assembly present. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And at this time, those letters have not been made public. They're parties in a confidentiality agreement. So if one of those people would like to make those public that has the legal right to do that, that's their right, not ours. So thank you, and we're adjourned.